Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is David Schuringa, the host of your program, and I'm the president of Crossroad Bible Institute. We have a special program today because I have a special friend here in the studio, Reverend Rich Reinstra. He's Chaplain Rich Reinstra in many respects because you're a volunteer pastor of Prisoner Reentry and Restorative Justice Ministries of the Church of the Servant at CRC.
That's correct.
And I think we got to know each other, especially when you were the founder or developer or church planter of Celebration Fellowship at Bellamy Creek Correctionals, correct?
That's correct, yeah. In fact, we use Crossroad Bible Institute correspondents who were in that prison, and that's how we got our first persons to come to the worship services.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That was the,
you provided us with that. Yeah.
Well, you invited me kindly to preach there several times, and enjoyed that very much.
Right.
And you're someone who's and your wife on fire for ministry to
That's
people
correct.
in prison.
We have the fire in our heart because we have a son, and not only that, but the gospel tells us that we should be there. And
right.
Our son Troy now hopefully is coming up for a parole hearing this year.
So, is he really? Is he still up north?
He is in Lakeland, down in Coldwater, and
they keep moving him around, huh?
They move around, and he's doing the Greyhound program there, where he trains a dog for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he does other services as well. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had on the program a little while back, just a couple weeks ago actually, a dog that was trained by people in prison, and they bring that dog to calm down kids who have to testify.
Yeah. And
when I was in Kentucky, I visited a prison there where they had the inmates working with animals, and that's I think we had a story not too long ago about a prison that cats are being used. It seems like it does a lot of good.
Smoothing effect, and teaching men patience and how to deal with
right.
a dog that's been brutalized in races and so forth. So,
it does a lot of character development there and all that.
Exactly.
But what it's done for you is opened your eyes to the criminal justice system.
Yes.
I mentioned about your son being transferred around. That's the very reason that Crossroads started over 30 years ago, is because of trying to find a way to stay connected with our guys because they keep moving them around. But you've been getting involved and getting people involved and on fire for all of these years, and I really appreciate that real service that you've been doing to the church and to the community.
Main priorities is to get people to go in and visit prisoners. I think that tells the story much better than reading books or whatever else.
The contact is very, very important. Yes, and those the prison churches like the one you started are very good for that because they use volunteers from area churches to come and worship with them and stuff.
And develop relationships, and hopefully those relationships will continue to support that person when they're back in the community. And
that's
get them
the goal.
to go to a church and so forth. Yeah.
But now today we're kind of here for a history lesson.
Right. Good.
I never saw you quite as a student of history, but you certainly are in this case because it has to do with prison history.
Yes.
And helping prisoners. The current Department of Corrections director, his name is
Daniel Hines.
Daniel Hines.
Yes.
And uncovering his heritage or pedigree, you found another Hines, his grandfather, Dr. Garrett Hines, who lived from 1891 to 1969.
Right.
And tell us about him.
It's quite a story. In fact, the father of Garrett Hines, the person that we just mentioned, 1891 to 1969, was a professor at the seminary.
One of the first ones.
Yeah, and we were just looking at, you have 3 of his books here, which is marvelous. And
that'd be the great-grandfather of the current director of
Exactly, because he came in from the Netherlands at 1881.
And so a lot of them came in
and he was pastor also at Eastern Avenue Christian Reformed Church, and a mural painted in honor of Dr. Garrett Hines.
That's the son of this professor.
That's the son of this professor. Then I might as well go through the entire family here. The next person is after Garrett is Roger Hines. And
this would be the father of the current director?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was the chancellor of University of California. He has died. And now we have the director, Daniel Hines. So that's
he's
5 generations there.
He's a great guy. Have met him. He's spoken for us and
yes.
for you and so forth. So tell us about Garrett.
Yeah, I was fascinated with him. It's just not a person back in the history. He made an impact in Michigan and in the nation and internationally in how you view penology, which is the study and practice of prison administration and rehabilitation of criminals. And,
wow.
And he was an educator. He was a superintendent of the Holland Christian Schools. He was, and I know many in your church audience would understand this, he was the first layperson who was an officer in the Christian Reformed Church in the General Synod meeting. And that is amazing that somebody like that could become...
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
So an officer, for our viewers' sake, meaning that, okay, we have the Senate, that's the national gathering of church leaders.
Correct.
But then you have a president of Senate, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer.
Exactly.
And those of you always were pastors.
Right, exactly.
And so he was the first
lay
person. He must have been, at least he was an elder, of course.
And he was known as the offender's champion. That's
really
when he died. That's I don't know if it's on his tombstone or what, but that was the term that they used.
How did that? Do you have any idea how that happened?
I think he was very strong in the area of how do we reclaim lives that have been disrupted, that they need some learning, that they don't have skills. He said 1/3 of those persons that are in the prison system could benefit from such training that would give them better living skills and helping them, you know.
Now this is a long time ago. I mean, this is what you're talking about in the 1900s, the early 1900s that he was doing this. Now, that sounds like a pretty modern view of penology. It sounds more restorative than retributive. Or
yes, definitely.
Was
definitely.
it?
Yes, yes. He, in fact, when you bring up that word, you have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so forth.
Right.
This is from one of his speeches. But I say unto you, love your enemies. We have not quite gone that far, but we are realizing, even from a selfish point of view, self-protection, that is the job of the corrections system, to help prisoners toward restoration to society as respectable, useful, law-abiding citizens, and incidentally, toward greater happiness. Now, he's talking about restorative, and this is in the 1930s, all right?
And yes, and also he, like Jesus, actually repudiated the reciprocity code.
Yes.
Because he said, you have heard it said eye for an eye, but I say thou. So he's recognizing that what I believe is that the cross fulfills the reciprocity code.
Right, exactly.
Because it's impossible to pay back God for our sins. It's impossible to pay back ultimately someone who has the image of God, right?
Yeah.
And so this is 1930s.
Yeah.
And any idea how he was accepted?
I think he was respected by his peers. He was the president of the American Prison Association, the American Parole Association, the National Corrector Administrators Association, and the Joint Commission on Training, Manpower, and Correctional Training. So, I mean, he was recognized in his field as one who was really turning around prisons, because prisons in the 1930s were, in many respects, at least Michigan's was, decided to reorganize their state's prison system in 1937, the governor did, putting what formerly had been a part of a political spoil system. You voted for the governor, you got a job in the spoil system in a prison. Under the civil service, educators were chosen to replace law enforcement officials as heads of prisons. And the philosophical emphasis on punishment and segregation shifted to education and rehabilitation.
Oh boy. We're going to take a little break here, but you just
that's hard to swallow, isn't it?
Well, what a beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And how do we get back to payback?
Exactly.
So strong. And how was that accepted?
Right.
That's like I said. That sounds incredibly prophetic.
Yes.
And like I say, if he was recognized for his work in penology, he was a bit like the rest of the Hines, a philosopher, theologian,
yes.
Sort of
all
sociologist,
of those,
all in one.
He was referred deeringly as Doc. When he walked the prison yard, they called him Doc. And I worked for 7 years in the African American church as a developer of housing, and whenever there is a minister in the black community that people really love and admire, and he doesn't have all the provincial credentials, they still refer to him as Doc.
That's really interesting because my mentor, Dr. Alexander DeYoung, who passed away many years ago, but he was my lifelong mentor, he did have the credentials, but he was affectionately referred to as Doc.
Yeah, Doc.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
The Center for Advanced Studies at Crossroad Bible Institute is sponsoring continuing education seminars for instructors and interested church members. These seminars cover a range of issues from restorative justice to responding to Islam. Seminars are open to everyone and free of charge, but advanced registration is required. To find a seminar in your area or to register for an upcoming seminar, go to cbi.fm on the web.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. My name is David Schuringa. I'm here in the studio with a good friend, Rich Reinstra. And Rich, a champion, a warrior for prison ministry, has done some research into the dustbins of history in Michigan prisons. We're talking about a Dr. Garrett Hines, who was the grandfather of the current head of the prison system in Michigan here. And he's been shocking me with one quote after another here, Rich, with this emphasis by this man in the 1930s on restoration, and not punishment, not a punitive approach to people in prisons. And he seems to have gotten it right out of the Bible, as he's quoting Jesus' fulfillment of, or setting aside, the reciprocity code.
That's correct.
So many Christians in this country don't get this, that Jesus fulfilled the reciprocity code just like he fulfilled the sacrifices of the Old Testament and the ceremonial laws, payback, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. That was something that man got himself into because of sin. But the whole Testament looks forward to getting out of that vicious cycle of decline. He got that.
Exactly.
And you say he was respected for it in the incarceration world and among leadership.
He was the first person to receive the Distinguished Service Award from Calvin College in 1966, and he won the Outstanding Achievement Award at the University of Michigan for his work. And I like to just refer to what that award at the University of Michigan said. Dr. Hines possesses in preeminent degree the qualities essential to a penologist: conviction, humanity, a sympathy, insight into individual human potentialities. His many articles and courses and lectures on criminology, which he has offered here and at Calvin College, testify to his bent in harmony with the power of decisive action. In rendering him the Outstanding Achievement Award, the University of Michigan expresses admiration for his attainments and qualities and gratitude alike for his services to the state and to honor which he has reflected upon his alma mater.
So from the U of M. Now, did his ideas disseminate at all from what you can see or find out, or is that not enough time to study that yet?
Well,
so he's being recognized at very high levels. So is this catching on in the country at this time?
In the 30s and 40s there, I don't know statistically what those are. I do know that he was very much how he analyzed it. 1/3 need to remain in prison longer, 1/3 should be immediately released, he said, and 1/3 should receive education and training. So
wow.
That's his point of view on what was happening.
Right.
And at that time, you got to remember, the director of the Department of Corrections was also the director of the mental health department. He was director of the mental retardation situation. And Dr. Hines also served for about 10, 15 years as the director of corrections in the state of Washington. And they lumped all those departments together because they saw a lot of needs that persons mentally ill and so forth were dropping into the correctional system, and they wanted to resolve that. Yeah, exactly.
And have you had a chance to talk about him with the current director of?
I've had occasion to talk.
So he's aware of the philosophy of his grandfather. And
yes,
stuff.
he is. Yes.
Boy, that's very encouraging, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
To understand that.
And where his grandfather came from was that there just was not enough being done. We can say this is the philosophy and stuff like that. We cannot make a prison a deterrent to crime, he maintained. The basic obstacle, he said, to early release of prisoners was the public hostility. The theory is that we will guide a man toward adjusting himself in the environment in which we expect him to live. And then in practice, we let him work out his own salvation. So I deal a lot with reentry, and I like that statement because he says, we need to continue to work with those persons, not say, well, now you're on your own, go do it. You know what I mean? And that's what you try to plant that seed through your Bible studies and
But also, interesting comments he made there, if I heard you right.
Yeah.
And that is, he said you should not look at prison time as a deterrent to crime.
Right.
Talk about that, because that's kind of the tit for tat approach that we use, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And sometimes what we do is we send people to prison for punishment rather than as punishment. You know what I mean? And he makes that distinction very strong, that we should not be doing that. And
also, you take the mandatory. I bet he would have despised mandatory sentencing.
Yes.
The 3 strikes you're outlaws and that kind of stuff, because there's just no way that biblical justice can be accomplished with mandatory sentencing, correct?
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so he would have had nothing to do with that.
Doing that, yeah, exactly. I was trying to find this one quote that he had. He has various views that he had. 5 ways to approach men. You got to do it when their medical needs, their industrial, what kind of vocational work they could do, what type of recreation they could do. Think of all these in the sense of a prison. And then their educational and their religious need. The object of all this is not coddling, but the protection of society through the reforms of the inmate. Without a good work program, we cannot do a satisfactory job at rehabilitation, he said. And that's one of the issues today. The director does not have the resources to pull off sometimes that rehabilitation program. And he said, above all, when the prisoner leaves, he needs a good friend. And I think that's what's happening with Crossroad as well. We must have good Samaritans on the outside to give him help. He's talking about. So
interesting. So if you read between the lines there, he was getting some criticism because he says we're not coddling.
Yes, right.
That means somebody was accusing him of coddling.
Yeah, right. He wrote papers for all kinds of organizations, federal papers and stuff like that. One of them is the rough men are back at it again. He was criticizing that rough philosophy that sometimes correctional systems have. Yeah.
Oh wow! Wow!
Yeah.
Well, this is just very, very interesting. And are you trying to get the message of Hines out there? Because here you are.
As much as I can. And I think, why am I enamored with someone like that is because even he said he's painted on a mural, and he's talking about, I'd rather treasure the mural, which the viewers will be seeing interspersed in this program, was the habit of explaining to citizens singly and in groups. I am glad that somebody wants to tell the story because a new generation has arisen, and I think the history of the mural and of how we did is important to share again. He has 42 boxes of file materials. A box has these file folders, about 20 in each box.
That have all been kept.
That have all been kept at the archives of Calvin College, yeah.
And so, what's in these
his
materials?
speeches, his radio talks. It's innumerable.
So it's got to be a treasure chest, a treasure trove of restorative justice fodder.
Yeah, some students should do a study of it for his master's degree and
Or
put a
his-
book
or a
together.
P-
on
or
it.
a
Yeah,
PhD,
yeah,
right.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay, well, we
Yeah.
got to take one more break here, but I want to get back to this. We've opened up some big issues, and we got to find out ways to get the message of Hines out there. We'll be right back after this.
Did you know that 750,000 people are being released from prison every year? They are returning to our communities and neighborhoods, and most will return to a life of crime. However, if they get into God's Word during incarceration, these people are more likely to return home as productive citizens. You can help by correcting their Bible study lessons in CBI's Safe and Secure Distance Learning Program. For more information, go to cbi.fm on the web.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. My name is David Scheringa. I'm here with Rich Reinster. We're talking about a historic figure in penology, the study of prisons, and that's this Dr. Garrett Hines. And he had what today is how we view people in prison, being restorative, not seeing prison time as retributive punishment, but restorative punishment.
Right.
That's how I make the distinction.
Exactly.
And not as a deterrent to crime, but to get people on their feet and so forth. And now this guy, these Hines, these were not liberals.
No.
I mean, the Hines family. Hines was his father was one of the first professors at Calvin Seminary. This was a very conservative Dutch ethnic corner of the church world. So this is not some radical.
And as we mentioned, one of his courses was deaconology. In other words, that's how deacons serve people and help people and so forth, visiting the sick and visiting those in prison. So.
And I'm from that area too. You're very conscious of how theology meets the praxis, and how theology and the praxis interact. And he's obviously. Even though he's leading a prison and his dad was in seminary, they're doing the same work, and I can see they're using the same theological method of the theology interacting with the praxis. So that's fascinating, because this is an application of really his dad's philosophy, and they're carrying that through.
And here his grandfather is the warden at Michigan Reformatory. He was the director of the Department of Corrections for a period of 9 years, and yet he wanted to be the warden because he wanted to be closer to the men. He has in those files that I mentioned earlier just folders and folders of correspondence from the men in the prison to him and so forth. And what he would do, would he write something to them? No, he would then go on the yard and talk to them. So he was very unusual in that respect. And he was the chair of the parole board. So I mean, who other than to know who should be recommended for release than somebody that's dealing with them all the time, every day long.
Absolutely. So here we have this fellow in the 1930s with this kind of perspective and so forth. Can you project, what happened? 'Cause this was prior to mass incarceration, and this was prior to what I call the fact that most prisoners are people of color. Can you project what in the world? Where did the wheels fall off the wagon?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think part of it is I go back to visitation. How do families maintain ties with one another? I'm serving as president of Citizens for Prison Reformed, and that's an advocacy agency that tries to help families to more effectively care for their loved ones.
Which, of course, is very difficult when they transfer them 500 miles away, right?
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
So often they're transferring. We talked about early on in the program that they get moved around, and they're usually can be very insensitive to their loved ones being able to have access to them, right?
Yeah, and now the department has on their website a family packet, which will help to give guidance to families to be more consistent with it. Dr. Hines, the way he did his work, he thought it was so important to have an accurate classification of a prisoner. And he worked hard on that. And then he also...
What does that mean, Rich?
Well, he wanted to have he involved the chaplains in that, in trying to understand and affirm the prisoner on who he was and what he wanted to be and what goals, and how do you feel about God? How do you feel about the Word? Those are the kind of questions that the chaplain processed with the inmates, and then he would pass on his recommendations then to the warden of the prison.
So this was a very, he wanted incarceration to be a humanizing experience.
Exactly. Yeah,
which is another huge difference today. It's not experienced as a very humanizing thing, and in fact, people feel like they're being treated like animals sometimes. And once again, I want to make very, very clear, I'm not criticizing our prisons or our prison systems or our chaplains or our wardens or our corrections of officers, because the prison system is exactly how the people want it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly how our culture wants it.
Yeah.
They want it punitive. They don't want to hear about what's going on, so they give the prisons basically unilateral authority to do anything they want as long as they keep the prisoners out of their sight. They're doing nothing that the culture does not dictate. So that's why a program like this is so important, and I'm so happy that you were here today to bring this to us, because this is the kind of information the culture needs to know.
Right.
The voters need to know. The people need to know. There's a better way.
Yeah, everyone should have an understanding of what we're trying to do in the correction system. That was the penology that he was talking about. He was the offender's friend. He was the offender's champion. And you can be a champion, as he was classified in his obituary when he died, because of the way that you feel how people should be restored. And that's what he was after.
Well, what he's doing, too, is how Jesus approached sinners. Yeah. You see, the church of the day, they were still in the reciprocity code, they required that a sinner, a tax collector who would be considered a crook today, had to first change, and then we will give you your status in society.
Right.
And you're right.
Yeah.
But Jesus, like Dr. Hines, treated them with that respect and that acceptance and that love first. That's grace. That's grace, and that's how we need to be looking at people in prison. Okay.
He said this redirecting of a man's thinking, of his point of view, of his ethics, is the important thing. For this reason, our correctional institutions should be adequately staffed with counselors, and especially with chaplains who are not burdened with several other duties. He has affirmed what the correctional officer did as well. In all this matter of rehabilitation, there is no force stronger than that of religion. Men don't lift themselves up by their own bootstraps, but rather by divine help sought and embraced. It is the force which will give them the right perspective and help them direct all of their thinking and talents toward remaking their lives.
You know what? I think we got to close. Our time has just gone.
Right.
So thank you so much for this. You need to go on a speaking tour about this, about the penology of Garrett Hines. Is there any place people can go to get more information on this guy, or is it a lot of it's his? It's kind of scattered around.
It's in the archives at Calvin College Library.
There's not like a book on.
There's not a book,
this.
And that's what
this
needs
is
to be
raw
done. The
this is
book
raw
needs
data.
to be written.
Thank you for being with us for this very, very important program. I can't think of anything more important than what we've talked about here today, so we really appreciate Rich. Get the word out about this program so others can see it, and we hope that we'll see you again right here next week.